Princess Charlotte witnessed a royal guard being harassed. What she did next shocked everyone. Princess Charlotte enjoyed peaceful afternoons more than anything else. Whenever her schedule allowed it, she liked taking a slow walk around the palace gardens with her nanny. These walks helped her feel calm after long days filled with lessons, polite greetings, and public appearances. For a young girl who carried a title from birth, quiet moments were precious. They made her feel like any other child exploring the world with bright eyes and endless curiosity. On this particular day, the sky above the palace was a soft shade of blue, scattered with clouds that moved like lazy cotton pieces. A gentle breeze floated through the large courtyard, brushing against the trees and flowers planted along the stone pathways. The air smelled of fresh leaves and early spring blossoms. It was the kind of day that made walking outside feel like a gift, not a duty. As Princess Charlotte stepped into the courtyard, she looked around with growing excitement. The palace grounds always felt magical to her. Every corner held a memory. Running here with her brothers, hiding behind that fountain during a family game, watching small birds rest on tree branches while she tried not to move and scare them away. Even though thousands of people visited the palace every year, Charlotte saw it with the warm familiarity of a child seeing her own backyard. What fascinated her the most, however, were the royal guards. Tall, steady, and always serious, they stood in their bright red uniforms and tall black hats, looking like statues that had somehow come to life. Charlotte admired their discipline and their calm silence. She often wondered what they thought about while standing still for so long. Did they think about their families, their favorite foods, or did they simply focus on the rhythm of breathing and staying alert? As she walked beside her nanny, her shoes tapping lightly against the stone, she turned her gaze toward one of the guard posts near the main entrance. Today, the area seemed more crowded than usual. Tourists moved around in excited groups, holding cameras and phones, eager to capture a moment with the iconic guards. Some whispered to each other while others pointed at the guards, amazed by their stillness. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking questions about why the guards never smiled or moved. Charlotte listened to their curious voices with a soft smile. She had asked the same questions when she was younger. "What a busy afternoon," her nanny remarked gently. Charlotte nodded. She felt a tiny spark of pride seeing how visitors admired the traditions her family had been part of for generations. She liked knowing that people came from all over the world to see the palace, to learn about the history, and to take pictures with the guards who stood so firmly in place. The princess walked a little slower, watching everything with the sharp attention of someone who enjoyed studying the world quietly. A group of children laughed near the fountain, chasing bubbles someone had blown into the air. Two older tourists held hands as they walked, smiling warmly at each other. A young artist sat on a bench with a sketchbook, trying to draw one of the guards as accurately as possible. Charlotte felt inspired by all of it, the colors, the sounds, the small stories happening around her. Her nanny glanced at her with a fond smile. "You like watching people, don't you, my dear?" Charlotte nodded once again. "I like learning how everyone sees the palace," she said softly. It was true. She loved hearing the way visitors described the buildings, the guards, or even the flowers planted in the gardens. Sometimes she would overhear tourists saying things like, "It's more beautiful than I imagined," or "The guards must be so strong to stand that long," or "This place feels like a dream." Their words made her appreciate home even more. Even though she lived in the palace every day, she never wanted to take it for granted. As they continued walking, her nanny talked about Charlotte's plans for the rest of the evening. There were lessons to complete, a book she needed to finish reading, and a family dinner later that night. Charlotte listened politely, but her mind wandered toward the guards again. Today, one guard in particular caught her attention. He stood by the tall gate that opened toward the busy street outside the palace. His eyes stared straight ahead, his posture perfectly straight, his expression unreadable. But something about him seemed different today, not in a bad way, but in a way that made Charlotte curious. Perhaps it was the way the sunlight hit his uniform, or how he seemed slightly younger than some of the other guards she had observed. She wondered if it was his first week on duty. Visitors were gathered around him, snapping photos and taking videos. Some stood at a respectful distance, while others leaned in a little closer, trying to test whether the guard would move. Charlotte had seen this behavior many times. People were often fascinated by how still the guards could remain. But Charlotte always felt a quiet respect for their work. She knew it was not easy. It took strength, patience, and focus, things even adults struggled with, let alone someone her age. Her nanny guided her toward another path, but Charlotte slowed her steps again. She could not help glancing back at the guard. The crowd near him seemed to be growing by the minute. More tourists had arrived, talking excitedly, their voices blending into a lively hum. Cameras clicked, children giggled, and people shifted positions to get the perfect photograph. Charlotte didn't mind crowds. She was used to being around people, used to cameras following her family, used to smiling for photographs on special occasions. But today her attention stayed fixed on observing, not participating. She found comfort in watching from a small distance, hidden among ordinary moments. The breeze grew a little stronger, brushing a few strands of hair across her forehead. She lifted her hand and tucked them behind her ear, then stood still for a moment, simply soaking in the atmosphere of the courtyard. Her gaze drifted past the guards, past the tourists, toward the horizon where the tops of buildings peaked above the palace walls. Life outside the palace moved quickly, always changing, always loud. But inside the gates, everything felt more controlled, more peaceful, at least on most days. Charlotte took a small step forward, fascinated by a butterfly that fluttered near a patch of flowers. Its wings glowed a light orange shade, almost transparent under the sunlight. She followed it quietly, enjoying the way it danced from one flower to the next. Her nanny walked beside her but kept a respectful silence, allowing the princess to explore the moment fully. Behind them, the steady rhythm of footsteps echoed from the guards marching into their next position. Charlotte turned briefly to watch them. The coordination of their movements always impressed her. They didn't rush. They didn't hesitate. Each step seemed measured, each action practiced until perfection. She admired that kind of dedication. "Do you think it's hard for them to stand still for so long?" Charlotte asked suddenly. Her nanny thought for a moment. "It must be, but they train for it. And they take pride in their duty." Charlotte nodded slowly. She liked that answer. Pride was something she understood even as a child. Her parents often taught her that one should be proud of good behavior, kindness, and completing responsibilities with care. So she believed the guards must feel the same way about their role. Her eyes drifted toward the gate again. The same young guard remained in position. She wondered if he noticed the butterfly too, but was unable to look. She wondered what it felt like to have so many people watching him at once. Did he hear their laughter? Did he see their phones moving around? Did he feel nervous? Charlotte turned back to the butterfly and watched as it finally rose into the air, carried upward by the gentle wind. She watched it disappear above the trees. The princess continued her walk, unaware that within the next few minutes, something unexpected would happen. Something that would draw her attention back toward the guard. Something that would test her courage in a way she had never experienced before. But for now, everything felt peaceful. The palace stood tall and steady behind her. The tourists continued their cheerful chatter. The guard remained firm in his place. And Princess Charlotte, with her thoughtful gaze and quiet curiosity, walked along the path, completely unaware that the calm of the afternoon was about to change. Princess Charlotte continued her peaceful walk through the palace courtyard, completely unaware that the gentle afternoon was slowly shifting into a moment that would stay in her memory for a very long time. She had just finished watching a butterfly disappear into the sky when she sensed a soft but noticeable change in the atmosphere. It was nothing loud or dramatic, just a simple feeling that something was different, something that pulled at her attention. The crowd near the gate had grown even larger within minutes. More visitors had arrived, their eyes wide with excitement as they pointed at the tall guards standing in their bright red uniforms. It was common for tourists to gather here, but today there was an unusual buzz, a kind of restless energy that made the air feel less calm than before. Charlotte slowed her steps and glanced toward the gate once again, curiosity rising inside her like a gentle wave. The same young guard she had noticed earlier still stood in his position. His posture remained straight, his eyes focused forward and his expression unchanged. But around him, something felt different. The people nearby were not simply taking pictures anymore. They were speaking louder, moving closer, and paying less attention to the quiet rules of respect that usually guided visitors. Charlotte's nanny walked beside her, unaware of the small tug of concern forming inside the princess's heart. Charlotte watched from a distance as a few teenagers stepped forward, joining the group closest to the guard. They looked excited, almost too excited, the kind of excitement that came from trying to impress each other rather than enjoy the beauty of the palace. At first, it seemed like ordinary behavior. Tourists often asked their friends to take photos of them standing near the guards. But soon Charlotte noticed something that didn't feel right. The teenagers were moving too close, almost into the space the guard needed to stand safely. They waved their hands around dramatically, pretending to copy the guard's stiff posture, laughing loudly when they failed to stand as still as he did. Charlotte had seen this type of behavior before. People often became playful around the guards because they were amazed by their stillness. But today the laughter felt different, sharper, louder, less friendly. It wasn't playful curiosity anymore. Something about it felt uncomfortable. The princess watched quietly, trying to understand what was bothering her. One of the teenagers leaned forward, putting his face so close to the guard that even the tourists around him paused. They exchanged puzzled looks with each other. Some stepped back, unsure of what to do. Others kept watching, perhaps expecting something entertaining to happen. Charlotte frowned slightly. She didn't like the look on the teenager's face. It wasn't full of joy or kindness. It was a look that said he wanted attention, not understanding. She shifted her feet, feeling uneasy for the first time that afternoon. Another teenager waved a small flag very close to the guard's shoulder. The guard, as expected, did not move. His training taught him to remain still no matter what happened around him. But Charlotte noticed something subtle. His fingers curled just slightly, as if he was trying to stay completely steady even though the situation was uncomfortable. For a child who grew up around people who served the palace, Charlotte understood the importance of their duties. The guards were not decorations. They were real people with real responsibilities. They worked hard every day, and their calm presence helped keep the palace safe. Seeing someone disturb this peaceful balance made Charlotte's heart tighten a little. Her nanny hadn't noticed yet. She was busy looking at a group of flowers they had stopped beside. So Charlotte quietly stepped forward for a better look, careful not to wander too far. She didn't want to get too close to the crowd, but she needed to understand what was happening. The teenagers continued laughing, trying to make the guard respond. One of them clapped loudly beside him, while another pretended to march in a silly way, copying the guard's formal steps. People in the crowd whispered to each other, unsure of whether to step in or simply wait for someone else to act. Charlotte felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, concern, and a little disappointment. She had always believed that people respected the guards. After all, the guards worked with great dignity. But today, these visitors didn't seem to understand that. She took a small breath and tried to observe the situation carefully. She wanted to make sure she wasn't misreading anything. Perhaps the teenagers were simply joking. Perhaps they would step back soon, but with every minute that passed, the situation seemed to grow more uncomfortable. One woman in the crowd shook her head disapprovingly. A man muttered something quietly, sounding unhappy with the teenagers' behavior. But no one stepped forward. No one spoke up. People were unsure, no one wanted to cause trouble, especially near the palace. And yet Charlotte could see the guard's subtle discomfort. Even though his face didn't move, even though his eyes stayed focused ahead, something about the situation was clearly not right. She felt it deeply, even though she was young. Her nanny finally noticed Charlotte's gaze fixed on the gate. "Is everything all right, dear?" she asked gently. Charlotte did not answer at first. She kept watching, trying to gather her thoughts. She didn't want to speak too quickly. She wanted to understand what she was seeing. She wanted to be certain that her concern was real. Another loud burst of laughter erupted from the teenagers. One of them stepped even closer, almost brushing against the guard's uniform. That was the moment Charlotte knew this wasn't harmless fun anymore. It was disrespectful, and the guard could not respond because of his duty. Charlotte felt a small spark of bravery inside her chest. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and warm, like stepping into sunlight after standing in the shade. She knew she couldn't ignore what she was seeing. She didn't know exactly what she would do yet, but she knew she couldn't simply walk away. Her nanny followed her gaze and finally saw the situation clearly. Her eyes widened slightly in concern. "Oh dear," she whispered softly. "That doesn't look proper at all." Charlotte stepped slightly closer to her nanny, her mind working quickly. She wasn't thinking of herself or her title. She wasn't thinking of rules or expectations. She was thinking only of the young guard, standing silently while strangers treated his duty like a game. The tourists around the gate began murmuring more loudly. Some held their phones up to record the moment, not realizing that their cameras added pressure to the situation. The air no longer felt peaceful. It felt crowded, tense, and uncomfortable. Charlotte watched as the teenager waved his hand right in front of the guard's eyes. The guard blinked once, a tiny reaction, barely noticeable, but enough to show how close the teenager had gotten. Charlotte felt her heart beat a little faster. She knew that if the guard broke his posture or stepped back, he might feel embarrassed, even though he had done nothing wrong. Something inside her told her this needed to stop. Her nanny placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Let's step back, sweetheart. It's getting a bit too busy here." But Charlotte didn't want to step back. She didn't want to leave the guard alone in such an uncomfortable moment. She didn't want to pretend she hadn't seen what she saw. She took another careful breath. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't angry. She was simply determined in a soft, quiet way. The kind of determination her parents always said she carried inside her, even when she didn't realize it. The crowd continued watching, unsure of what to do. The teenagers continued their loud behavior, unaware that someone smaller, younger, and far braver than they expected was paying close attention. Charlotte knew that the peaceful afternoon she had enjoyed earlier was slipping away, replaced by a moment that required courage, and she could feel that courage growing, steady and bright. She didn't know it yet, but what she would choose to do next would surprise everyone. Princess Charlotte stood very still for a moment, feeling the world around her become strangely quiet even though the crowd near the gate was getting louder. It was as if her mind had softened every sound, allowing her to think clearly. She did not feel afraid, and she did not feel unsure. Instead, she felt a quiet strength growing inside her, a strength she didn't often notice but had always carried. She knew she had to do something, not because she was a princess, but because she was a person who cared about others. Her nanny watched her closely, sensing the change in her expression. "Charlotte," she whispered gently, "are you all right?" Charlotte nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the teenagers near the guard. She wasn't angry at them. She simply wished they could understand how uncomfortable their behavior had become. She wished they could see the guard the way she did, as someone doing an important job with patience and dignity. The teenagers were still laughing loudly. One of them leaned back and pretended to faint from standing too still, causing the others to burst into more laughter. Another teenager made a silly face at the guard, expecting a reaction, but the guard stayed steady and silent, holding his posture with admirable focus. Charlotte took a small step forward. Her nanny hesitated but didn't stop her. She knew Charlotte well enough to understand that the young princess wasn't acting out of mischief. She was acting out of concern. The princess's shoes clicked softly on the stone ground as she approached the crowd. The sound was small, but to her, each click felt like a heartbeat, a reminder that she was moving with purpose. She didn't push through the people or demand attention. She simply walked with calm confidence, the kind that made people naturally step aside without even realizing why. Some visitors noticed her moving forward and whispered to each other, recognizing her. Others didn't know who she was but felt something respectful in her presence. Even though she was young, there was a quiet grace in the way she carried herself. Charlotte reached the edge of the group, stopping only a few steps away from the teenagers. She didn't get too close. She didn't want to startle anyone. She simply stood there, waiting patiently for the right moment to speak. At first, the teenagers didn't see her. They were too focused on trying to entertain each other. But then a small girl in the crowd pointed toward Charlotte, whispering excitedly to her mother. A few others turned their heads, their expressions shifting from amusement to surprise. Charlotte didn't notice the growing attention around her. She was looking only at the teenagers, who finally noticed the sudden quiet behind them. They turned around one by one, and when they saw her standing there calmly, their laughter faded into silence. The teenagers exchanged confused glances. They hadn't expected a child, especially a polite-looking little girl, to step forward and interrupt their fun. But there was something gentle yet firm in Charlotte's eyes that caught their attention completely. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't speak with anger. Instead, she opened her mouth and spoke in a soft, clear tone. "Excuse me," she said kindly. "May I talk to you for a moment?" The teenagers were so surprised that they simply nodded. One of them even stepped back slightly, unsure of what to say. Charlotte continued, her voice steady. "He is doing his job," she said, glancing at the guard. "It is not easy to stand so still. He is trying very hard and he deserves respect. Please don't make his work more difficult." She paused for a moment, letting her words settle into the air. "I know you may not mean harm," she added gently, "but it looks uncomfortable for him. Maybe you didn't notice. Sometimes we don't realize when something feels wrong for someone else. But now that you know, maybe you can step back a little." Her tone was soft, almost soothing. Not once did she sound upset or harsh. Instead, she sounded like someone offering guidance, not criticism. The teenagers stood quietly, absorbing her words. None of them expected such maturity from someone so young. Her calm honesty touched something inside them, something that made them rethink their actions. One teenager looked down at the ground, embarrassed. Another scratched his head awkwardly. The boy who had been waving his hand near the guard nodded slowly. We didn't think about it like that," he said quietly. "We were just trying to be funny." Charlotte offered a gentle smile. "I understand, but sometimes being kind is better than being funny." The teenagers exchanged another set of glances, this time softer, more thoughtful. They stepped back from the guard, giving him more room. Some of the crowd members who had watched the moment unfold began smiling warmly, touched by how politely Charlotte had handled everything. Even the tourists who didn't know who she was felt admiration for her. It wasn't her title that impressed them, it was her bravery paired with kindness. She didn't embarrass the teenagers, she didn't speak harshly, she simply helped them see another point of view. Her nanny reached her side then, but she didn't pull her away. Instead, she placed a gentle hand on Charlotte's shoulder, a quiet sign of support and pride. The courtyard felt different now, softer, calmer. The chatter of tourists resumed, but this time with a lighter tone, filled with warm whispers about the young girl who had stepped forward with such calm confidence. Charlotte looked at the guard next. Even though he could not speak to her or move beyond his duty, she sensed a small change in the atmosphere around him. Something lighter, something grateful. She didn't need a smile or a nod. She simply felt in her heart that he appreciated her gesture. She gave a tiny, respectful bow of her head toward him before turning back to her nanny. "Are you ready to continue our walk?" her nanny asked softly. Charlotte nodded, feeling a sense of peace again. She had not planned to do anything special that day. She had not expected to speak to strangers or guide anyone. But sometimes important moments arrived quietly, without warning. And sometimes it only took a small action from a small person to make the world feel kinder. As they began walking away, Charlotte heard one of the teenagers speak behind her. "I didn't know she'd say it so nicely," he murmured to his friends. "She didn't make us feel bad, she just made us understand." Another teenager let out a soft breath. "Yeah, I guess we shouldn't have done that." Charlotte didn't turn around, but she felt a soft warmth in her chest. She hadn't wanted to embarrass them. She only wanted to help them see something they hadn't noticed. And now that they understood, everything felt calmer. The tourists who had watched the scene slowly drifted back into their own activities. A few parents pointed at Charlotte as she walked by, telling their children how brave and polite she was. Some even whispered about how amazed they were by such maturity in someone so young. Charlotte heard none of it clearly, but even if she had, she would not have felt proud in a showy way. She simply felt relieved that the guard could continue his duty peacefully and that the situation had settled without anyone feeling upset. Her nanny bent down slightly so she was at Charlotte's eye level. "You spoke with such grace, my dear," she said softly. "I am very proud of you." Charlotte smiled a small, humble smile. "I just wanted to help," she replied, and she had helped more than she realized. Her gentle bravery had changed the atmosphere, softened hearts, and reminded people around her that kindness could be powerful without ever being loud. As she walked away from the gate, the sunlight touched her hair, and she felt lighter than before. She didn't know that people would talk about this moment later. She didn't know that some visitors would remember the young princess who stepped forward with courage wrapped in kindness. She only knew that her heart felt calm again, and that was enough for her. The palace courtyard returned to its peaceful rhythm. Birds fluttered above the trees. Children laughed near the fountain. The guard stood steady once more, now surrounded by calm, respectful visitors. And Princess Charlotte walked on, her small footsteps carrying a quiet strength that surprised everyone who witnessed it. The courtyard seemed to breathe again after the moment of tension faded away. For several minutes, Everything had felt tight and uncertain, as if the air itself was waiting to see what would happen. But once Princess Charlotte gently spoke to the teenagers and guided them with such kindness, the atmosphere softened like morning light spreading over a quiet garden. The tourists near the gate slowly settled back into their usual excitement, but it was a gentler kind of excitement now. Their voices were lighter, their smiles warmer. Some looked at Charlotte with admiration, while others simply felt grateful that the moment had resolved so peacefully. Even the teenagers seemed calmer as they stood to the side, speaking quietly among themselves. Charlotte walked a few steps away with her nanny, but she could still hear the softened murmurs behind her. She didn't turn around, yet she felt the change in the air, as if a breeze of relief had passed through the entire group. She felt a gentle glow in her heart, not from pride, but from knowing she had done something meaningful without hurting anyone's feelings. Her nanny held her hand tenderly, guiding her toward the nearby pathway lined with flowers. "That was very thoughtful of you," she said softly. "You used your words with such care." Charlotte looked up at her. "I didn't want them to feel bad," she said. "I just wanted them to understand." "And that," her nanny replied with a warm smile, "is a very special kind of courage." They continued walking, their steps unhurried, as if the afternoon belonged entirely to them again. But something new followed them, a gentle sense of admiration from the people who had witnessed what Charlotte had done. It wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was more like a quiet ripple of kindness spreading from one heart to another. The tourists closest to the moment began clapping softly, almost hesitantly at first. One person started it, an older woman with kind eyes who had watched the entire scene with her hands clasped together. Then another person joined, and another. Soon, a soft wave of applause moved through the small crowd, not loud enough to disturb the guards, but just enough to show appreciation for the young princess's courage and gentle spirit. Charlotte heard the sound but didn't understand at first that it was for her. She paused and turned slightly, her expression sweet and puzzled. When she saw several visitors smiling warmly at her, she looked down shyly. She wasn't used to applause in this kind of moment. She had spoken only to help, not to draw attention. Her nanny gave her a little squeeze on the hand. "It seems you touched many hearts today," she said gently. Charlotte did not know what to say. She simply nodded, feeling a mix of shyness and gratefulness. She wasn't used to such reactions during quiet moments. She was used to applause during public events or special celebrations, but this felt different. It felt personal. One tourist, a young mother holding a toddler, stepped a little closer, not too close, just enough for Charlotte to hear her words. "You're very kind," the woman said softly. "My little one was watching you. You taught him something important today." Charlotte looked at the toddler, who smiled at her with wide, innocent eyes. She felt a flutter in her chest, a warm feeling of connection that surprised her. She offered the child a tiny wave, and the toddler waved back happily, causing his mother to laugh quietly with joy. Nearby, an artist who had been sketching earlier stood up from his bench. His sketchbook rested in his hands, and he watched Charlotte walk with a thoughtful expression. He had seen everything, the laughter, the tension, and the gentle way she stepped forward. He felt inspired in a way he hadn't expected. Sometimes inspiration came from grand views or historical buildings. Today, it came from a quiet act of kindness by a child. Even the teenagers who had been causing the disturbance earlier seemed touched by the moment. They stood together, whispering among themselves. One of them looked especially thoughtful, tapping the toe of his shoe against the ground softly. Another one looked at Charlotte and almost smiled, not a confident smile, but a shy, grateful one. "It was nice of her," one teenager said quietly. "She didn't shout or anything." "Yeah," another replied. "She talked to us like we mattered." They didn't know how to express it properly, but they all felt lighter than before. Deep inside, they understood that they had been given a gentle reminder, not a harsh lesson. Charlotte didn't hear their words, but she sensed the change. The courtyard no longer felt uncomfortable. Instead, it felt brighter, as if the sunshine had grown stronger even though the sky hadn't changed at all. She glanced once more at the guard who had been at the center of the moment. He remained still, steady, and focused, as was his duty, but something subtle in his presence felt different. Perhaps it was the peaceful air around him now. Perhaps it was simply Charlotte's imagination, but she felt that he, too, was relieved. Her nanny suggested they walk toward the fountain for a small rest before heading back inside. Charlotte agreed, and they began moving in that direction. As they walked, she passed several visitors who smiled or nodded at her. Some spoke softly. "That was very brave. What a polite young girl. She handled that beautifully." Charlotte felt her cheeks grow warm. She wasn't sure how to respond, so she offered small smiles and gentle nods. She didn't want anyone to feel like she was ignoring them, but she also didn't want to seem overly proud. She had acted because it felt right, not for applause. When they reached the fountain, Charlotte sat on the edge of the stone circle and dipped her fingers lightly into the cool water. It felt refreshing, soothing the warmth in her cheeks. Her nanny sat beside her, watching the water ripple gently around Charlotte's fingers. "You know," her nanny said after a moment of quiet, "sometimes the simplest words can change a whole situation." Charlotte looked at the water thoughtfully. "I didn't want trouble," she said. "I just didn't want the guard to feel uncomfortable." "And that," her nanny replied softly, "is exactly what made your words so powerful. You spoke from kindness, not from anger." Charlotte looked at her nanny with a soft smile. "I hope they understood." "They did," her nanny said, "and so did everyone watching." A gentle breeze moved through the courtyard, brushing lightly against Charlotte's hair. She looked around at the palace walls, the flowers swaying in the wind, the families taking photos together, and the birds hopping along the edge of the fountain. Everything felt peaceful again, beautifully peaceful. A small group of children approached, all younger than Charlotte. They walked slowly, guided by a teacher who seemed slightly nervous about interrupting the princess's moment of rest. But the children looked so curious that Charlotte couldn't help but smile at them. One little girl stepped forward hesitantly. "Were you scared?" she asked in a tiny voice. Charlotte shook her head gently. "Not really, I just wanted to help." The children looked at each other with wide eyes, impressed by her simple answer. The teacher thanked Charlotte politely for speaking to them, then guided the children away. Her nanny looked at her with admiration. "You may not realize it now," she said, "but you encouraged many people today, even grown-ups." Charlotte tilted her head, a little surprised. "I just talked." "Sometimes," her nanny replied, "talking is exactly what the world needs." The warmth of that idea settled in Charlotte's heart. She had always believed in kindness, but today she learned that kindness could shape moments, shift moods, and help people see each other more clearly. The afternoon sun lowered slowly, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Charlotte and her nanny rose from the fountain, ready to return indoors. As they walked, more visitors continued to smile at her, but no one approached too closely. They respected her space while still showing appreciation. Before stepping away completely, Charlotte glanced one last time at the young guard. Though he did not move, she felt a quiet understanding between them, a silent thank you shared in the calm air. Her nanny gently guided her toward the palace doors, and Charlotte felt a soft glow inside her chest, like a lantern that had just been lit. She didn't know that people would speak about this moment later. She didn't know that some visitors would tell their families about the brave little girl who turned an uncomfortable scene into a peaceful one. She only knew that she had followed her heart, and in doing so, she had helped create a moment of understanding. And that was enough to make her smile as she walked back toward the palace, her small footsteps carrying a kindness that echoed long after she left the courtyard. As Princess Charlotte and her nanny walked back toward the palace, the world around them seemed to return to its gentle rhythm. The soft breeze brushed against the leaves, the birds continued their cheerful singing, and the sunlight streamed gently across the courtyard stones. But for Charlotte, something inside her felt changed. A quiet feeling of purpose, warm and glowing, followed each step she took. The palace entrance doors opened slowly as they approached, and two kind attendants greeted them. Charlotte offered them a polite smile, though her mind was still lingering on what had happened outside. She felt calm, yet thoughtful, as if her heart was holding a quiet story that she would remember for many years. Her nanny guided her toward the hallway, where warm lights glowed softly along the walls. "You did something very meaningful today," her nanny said gently as they walked. "You may not realize it yet, but your words helped bring peace to many people." Charlotte looked down at her shoes as she walked. "I'm glad it ended nicely," she said. "I didn't want anyone to feel upset." "And they did not," her nanny reassured her. "You spoke with kindness, and kindness often brings peace." Charlotte nodded, feeling comfort in those words. She didn't fully understand the larger impact her small action had made, but she knew she had done something good. Her heart felt lighter because of it. As they reached a long hallway filled with framed paintings of royal history, Charlotte slowed down. She looked at each painting, wondering quietly about the people in them. They were kings, queens, princes, princesses, and leaders from long ago. Some of them stood in formal clothes, some sat proudly in grand rooms, and others were painted outdoors among nature. But all of them carried expressions that told stories, stories of decisions, responsibilities, and acts that shaped their time. She wondered if any of them had faced moments like hers, moments where they had to decide whether to speak or stay silent, moments where kindness was more important than anything else. She wondered whether they had ever stood as she had, in a small courtyard, trying to help strangers understand one another. Her nanny noticed her thoughtful expression. "What are you thinking about, dear?" she asked gently. Charlotte glanced at one painting of a queen who looked calm and wise. "Do you think," she began softly, "that she ever had to help people understand something important?" Her nanny smiled warmly. "I believe many people in history have had moments where they needed to speak with kindness. And today, you had such a moment too." Charlotte didn't say anything else. She simply looked at the painting once more and felt a sense of connection, a feeling that even small actions could create threads that tied people together across time. They continued walking until they reached a sitting room with large windows that showed a view of the gardens. Charlotte sat on a comfortable chair near the window and looked outside. From inside, the courtyard looked peaceful again, just as it had at the beginning of the afternoon. She could see visitors walking happily, taking photos, and admiring the beauty of the palace. Everything seemed calm and ordinary, yet she knew that the day had not been ordinary at all. Her nanny brought her a glass of warm milk, which Charlotte accepted gratefully. As she sipped it, she thought about the teenagers, the guard, and the tourists who had watched everything unfold. She wondered what they were thinking now. She wondered if they were telling someone else about what happened, or if they were reflecting quietly, just like she was. Outside, the young guard continued his duty with poise and dignity. Though he couldn't show emotion during his shift, Charlotte imagined he might feel relieved that the situation had ended smoothly. She hoped he felt respected again, and she hoped he knew that someone cared enough to speak up for him in a gentle way. The sun began lowering toward the horizon, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. Charlotte watched the colors blend together like a beautiful watercolor painting. She felt peaceful again, as if the world had returned to its natural balance. After a while, her nanny reminded her that she had a family dinner soon. Charlotte stood up and followed her toward the dining area. As she walked, she felt a quiet excitement about seeing her family. She wondered if she should tell them what happened in the courtyard, but part of her hesitated. She didn't want to seem as if she was seeking praise. She only wanted to share the moment because it felt meaningful. When they reached the dining room, the warm scent of delicious food greeted them. Her parents were already seated, talking gently among themselves. When they saw her, they smiled with affection. "There you are, Charlotte," her father said kindly. "Did you enjoy your walk today?" Charlotte nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "Something interesting happened." Her parents listened attentively as she told them the story, not in a dramatic way, but in a simple, honest voice. She explained how she had noticed the guard looking uncomfortable, how the teenagers had been a little too playful, and how she had spoken to them gently. She didn't add anything extra to make the story big or exciting. She simply described what she saw and how she felt. Her parents listened without interrupting, their expressions warm with admiration. When she finished, her mother reached out and held her hand gently. "That was very thoughtful, Charlotte," her mother said in a soft, loving tone. "You showed maturity and kindness. You didn't react with anger. You used gentle words to help others understand. That is a beautiful way to lead." Her father nodded in agreement. "Leadership is not always loud," he added. "Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is simply doing the right thing with a kind heart. And you did exactly that." Charlotte felt her heart warm with their gentle praise. She didn't feel proud in a boastful way. She felt grateful, grateful that her parents understood her feelings and recognized the intention behind her actions. As they enjoyed dinner together, the conversation moved to other topics, but Charlotte carried the memory of the day close to her heart. She knew she would never forget the moment she stepped forward in the courtyard. She knew now that courage didn't always feel like a huge force. Sometimes it felt like a soft push inside the heart, a whisper that said, "You can help." Later in the evening, after dinner and some quiet time with her family, Charlotte returned to her room. She sat on the soft edge of her bed, thinking about all the small moments that had led to that powerful one. She thought about the butterfly she had followed earlier, the flowers she had admired, the children who had asked her questions, and the tourists who had smiled at her. She realized that the world was full of little chances to make a difference. Not every moment would be big or loud. Some would be small, gentle, and easily missed, unless someone chose to pay attention. Charlotte smiled softly at this thought. She felt older somehow, not in age, but in understanding. She had learned something important about herself and about the world around her. She had learned that her voice, even though small and quiet, could still bring peace. She changed into her night clothes and climbed into bed. As she lay under her warm blanket, she looked out the window one last time. The stars were beginning to shine in the night sky, twinkling gently like tiny lanterns. Her nanny came in to wish her good night. "Sleep well, dear," she said softly. "You made today brighter for many people." Charlotte smiled. "Good night," she whispered. As she closed her eyes, she felt a peaceful comfort settle over her. The palace around her grew quiet. The world outside relaxed into night. And in her heart, the gentle glow of kindness continued to shine, steady, warm, and full of promise. She didn't know what other moments life would bring her, but she knew something true and important. A gentle voice could make people understand, and even the smallest person could create a moment that touched many lives. As she drifted into sleep, the memory of the courtyard, the guard, and the soft applause stayed with her like a warm whisper. It was a day she would remember forever, not because it was grand, but because it was good.